Okay, hopefully everyone can see my presentation. So yeah, hi everyone. I'm excited to be here and talk a little bit about career upskilling and answer some questions. I love what TKH is and what you guys all have been doing, and I've been volunteering as Giassi's mentor, kind of helping him with his career upskilling. So I'm happy to be here to share those tips and tricks with you guys as well. To give a quick introduction of myself, and I think it really does set the stage for what we'll be talking about today. So hi, my name is Lily. I'm currently a technical customer success manager and team lead at Cloudinary. As a CSM, I work with some of Cloudinary's largest customers as their main point of contact, building relationships and encouraging adoption of our product. As you may know by now, Cloudinary is a developer-facing and technical product. So our CSM team also we all have technical backgrounds of some sort. Though if you are looking up the title CSM or customer success manager for other industries or other companies, that might not necessarily be the case. So it's kind of something to look out for. Technical customer success manager is kind of a new and emerging rare breed so far. I'm also a team lead. So as a team lead, I lead the remote team of 4 folks that work with our East Coast customers, and I guide and mentor them from small day-to-day fires to larger strategic conversations that they may have with their customers. I've been at Cloudinary for just over 3 years now. I actually started off as a CSM with our smaller growth customers, progressed through enterprise, and then now as a team lead. As far as background, I was born and raised in Southern California. I moved up to the San Francisco Bay Area for college. I went to UC Berkeley and I studied chemical engineering. And obviously, since I'm here in front of you today in tech, you can see that I'm not a chemical engineer. My first exposure to computer science and development was actually one of my courses in Berkeley, which was called Programming for Engineers. We used a language called MATLAB, which I found very similar to Python. So it kind of let me jump to Python a little bit easier. My first job out of college was Accenture, which is a consulting firm as an analyst. I stayed there for a year, went over to Clover, which is actually that company with those modern cash registers and like card swipe things that compete with Square. You've probably seen them all around. I was a developer operations and account manager there. And then about 2 years there, I finally landed at Cloudinary where I am today. So based on my background and my little kind of introduction, the first question I get from a lot of people is how did I jump from chemical engineering to tech? And I actually have, I'll save that for later in the presentation, but don't worry, I'll get to it. For now, as an introduction, I just wanted to say that I myself am still early in my career. If you stalked my LinkedIn before this, you know that I graduated in 2015. So I'm nowhere near an expert, and I'm learning as I go along as well. So I'm just excited here to kind of share my tips and trips for what I've learned along the way. So getting into what we'll be talking about today, I thought it would be helpful to frame it in the context of someone's career journey. So something that you all are probably getting into, if not deep into already as part of this TKH program. So what we'll do is we'll start off with preparing your credentials. And so we'll talk about, LinkedIn and resume and stuff like that. Next, you'll want to start applying for jobs and internships. We'll talk about customizing your resume and applications. We'll go into interview prep. We'll go into navigating your offer once you have that, just really quick. We'll go into day 1. How do you prep yourself for your first day on the job? And how do you set yourself up for success? And then finally, how do you set yourself up for continued success? And we'll talk about time management, what goals you should set for yourself, and how to keep a growth mindset. I'm going to preface and apologize in advance. I talk very quickly, and I'm trying to fit a ton of information into a short-ish period of time. So we'll have time for questions at the end for sure, and I'm definitely going to send these slides to Derek, so don't worry about like frantically taking notes or anything. I was just saying before people joined that these slides are almost notes in themselves because there's a lot of text. So here we go. So the first thing is LinkedIn and resume. I'm going to preface, like, throughout your career, you're going to meet a lot of people and they're all going to have their own opinion about what is the perfect resume and the perfect LinkedIn, right? Do you need a really, really fancy resume with like infographics and graphs and stuff? Do you need to be an influencer on LinkedIn and like write posts that go viral? I don't know. It's something where everything's different. I think every industry and every career path is different as well. So I figured I'd just show you mine, just so you have another example in your arsenal. On the left is obviously LinkedIn, on the right is the resume. As far as looks, my resume has like a little bit of color, has two colors, just to show that I have some personality and that I'm young and I'm modern. You'll see a lot of folks, like old school resumes are Times New Roman font or something like that, black and white, not much color. I don't think those are bad. There's actually some industries where those are the resumes that you need because that is the industry standard, and they don't want people who are like trying to be trendy and fancy. But for startups and tech and software in general, which I feel like a lot of you guys are kind of going towards, as far as I've seen, this general style and more creative is kind of the type that you want to go for. You don't need to go to the extreme though, which brings me to tip number 1. Visually, you should show your personality while keeping your resume clean. And there's several reasons for this. You can find resumes online and you can, copy the design and stuff like that. But if they don't really reflect who you are, you're kind of already putting like a false kind of thing in front of the recruiter, in front of a company that you're about to work for, right? It's also to be careful because some very large companies use resume screening softwares before a human even sees it. And they're like pretty good these days, but if for some reason your text, one of your qualifications is hidden because we put it in a fancy infographic or a fancy graph or something, some of these screen readers might just pass right over it and you would have been filtered out before you even got in front of a human who can actually appreciate the nice design that you actually put on it. So if a human is reading your resume, obviously adding a simple pop of color will show your personality, catch interest, show that you're modern without distracting too much. If you're going into UX design or creative or something like that, obviously your resume would be a good place to express that creativity. So that's kind of the exception to the rule. But I think that you could easily do that via a link to your portfolio or something as well. So if you're not going for one of those like super creative, like super front end design sort of jobs, I personally suggest that people keep it simple. It's also easier for you to manage too, which I'll kind of go into in a little bit. When there's not so many things happening, when you need to change something, you don't need to spend an extra 20 minutes trying to reformat it to look perfect again. So that's also a thing that you want to keep in mind. My tip number 2 is that your LinkedIn should be just as up to date as your resume. It's just as important. And I kind of preface this as like, if you're about to go on a date with someone, sometimes you like stalk them on Facebook or stalk them on Instagram. When someone's about to interview you or someone is going to reach out to you for an interview or recruiter, they will be looking at your LinkedIn for sure. Even if you submitted your resume, they're going to go to your LinkedIn because it's just easier to like Google search someone's LinkedIn than dig through a pile of resumes and look it up. So your LinkedIn is important and should be content-wise up to date and should match relatively closely to your resume. So make sure that anything that you're changing on your resume that's like significant, you should also change it on your LinkedIn. You'll see on my LinkedIn on the left here that my Cloudinary role isn't like fully filled out. The reason for this is a kind of like insider industry joke tip is that like when I started at Cloudinary, in that first like week or so, if I didn't like update my job description, you kind of can't update it until later, because if I updated it, most recruiters at most companies, they have this like insider LinkedIn software that can like track people's LinkedIn updates, and they for sure monitor all the employees, because if I were to go in and update my LinkedIn like full professional right now, they would assume that I'm looking for another job. So that's kind of, so you'll see that kind of probably commonly when you're stalking like other people on LinkedIn. In any case, if you look over my past experience, you'll see that the bullet points that I have on my LinkedIn are pretty much word for word the bullet points that I have on my resume. So again, they should really match. You shouldn't say something completely different on your resume than you do on your LinkedIn. And then related, your LinkedIn may have way more details than your resume, right? You're going to have your entire work history on your LinkedIn, and that's okay. Your LinkedIn is truly a history of your entire career, whereas your resume should be more tailored. Which brings me to number 3, your resume should never be more than 1 page. This is just a really quick tip, and I'm sure you've heard it multiple times. Unless you're a professor at a university and have 12 papers under your name, there's no reason that your resume should be greater than 1 page. You can knock off any experience that is not relevant to the role that you're trying to apply for or that you're trying to get. Your resume should be tailored to the position you're applying for. And if anyone needs any specific formatting tips, like they're like, I'm trying to get under 1 page, like what are some hacks? Like reach out and I can give you some. Tip number 4, again, you've heard it before, use active language in your descriptions of your roles. This is an area where personally in the past, this is kind of touching upon kind of being proud of where you're coming from, right? In the past, I felt really weird about like embellishing my role and like using super fancy words, and providing numbers and statistics seemed fake if I was kind of just pulling them out of nowhere. That is pure imposter syndrome talking here. So just like kick that out of your head. Like you need to use active language. So I wanted to go into a specific example to kind of show you. So take my description of my job at Clover, for example, that I had in my resume. At Clover, basically, I talked to developers. I approved their apps. Like I kind of was the person that approved apps. They'd ask me questions. I tried to answer them, report them to documentation. If they had feedback, I would submit it in this like internal portal situation. There's a huge difference in the way that I could have described this if I was trying to, if I was like so self-conscious about like embellishing my job or whatever, right? I could have said, I provided feedback from developers on the platform to internal teams, and then I answered developers' questions on how to integrate with Clover. Those two sentences are completely factual, completely valid. They're not belittling my job. But the point of your descriptions in your resume are to impress the interviewer and impress the recruiter with what you've achieved. And honestly, you should be proud. No job is a small job. So you should remember this. You should be proud of the achievements that you have. And if it wouldn't be a job if you weren't necessary. So you should own it, you should be proud of it, and then impress me, the viewer of the resume, with your role. The more active and engaging, the better. And don't sound bored of your own job that you already have, right? Or that you had. If you look up online, there's like a ton of jokes about this, how you can like turn a line cook at McDonald's into like sounding something crazy. And like, that is the magic of words. And I think you should take advantage of that. So, what I eventually turned it into, because honestly, some of my early drafts on the resume did look like this first one, is, I collaborated and provided data-driven insights to internal product engineering and marketing teams to create new opportunities for developers to succeed on our platform. I empowered third-party developers and enterprise partners to create better integrations by learning their business and applying Clover expertise to their apps. So I also want to preface that like I probably looked at the job description for Cloudinary and I kind of updated my descriptions a little bit to kind of match. So we'll go into that in a little bit. That's what I'm kind of saying about tailoring your descriptions to the job that you're applying for. And my last one for this section before we actually move into that is that your LinkedIn is like a running tab of your job history. And like it should list everything. That's where you kind of list your entire history in terms of clubs, in terms of your school, in terms of any organizations you volunteer for, TKH, obviously all of that should be in there. Any hobbies that you have, definitely put it on there. Your resume that you use can and should change based on the job that you're applying for and the job description. So specifically, the words that you use, the skills that you list, and the experience you choose to put on there versus the ones you choose to leave off. Even the order in which your resume in, like sometimes you want to put education up top, sometimes you put it up bottom. It depends on the job you're applying for. So these should be tailored. So with that last tip being said, I wanted to move into how to put your best foot forward while applying to jobs before we get into kind of tailoring the resume, because I'll go into examples of that too. So some just really quick like tips and tricks. You should stay organized when you're applying to jobs. I use Google ecosystem like everywhere, Gmail, Google Drive, all that stuff. I love using Google Sheets because everything else in the Google ecosystem basically covers everything you need to keep everything digital and organized. So if you're not familiar with Google Drive, Google Docs, Google Sheets, it's a really good opportunity for you to get more familiar with it, because honestly, it's becoming synonymous. It's almost like Microsoft Word and Office and Excel, right? People used to put that as a skill on their resume, and now it's a given. Like if you don't know how to use Microsoft Word, it's like kind of, Google Docs is kind of becoming that in tech. If you don't know how to use the Google ecosystem, you should at least be familiar with the tools that you have and kind of try to get more familiar with it. Staying organized when applying, also make sure that you know exactly what resume you applied with. So you can reference that when you're interviewing. So it also helps you easily find the job description if you need to look back to it, right? You're going to be applying to all these jobs. You can't, searching through your email is super hard. Sometimes it's not even an email. You submit it in this portal and it goes off to the abyss. So you want to make sure that you're keeping track, right? My next quick tip, and sorry if you hear some weird noise, it's my dog, she's coughing. My next quick tip is that job hunting is a numbers game. Internship hunting, job hunting. It's a numbers game. The first job that you need to apply to, or the first job that you're trying to get, you're going to apply to a lot of jobs. And I'm not saying like 10 to 15 jobs. You're going to maybe apply to 40, 50, 60, to the extreme, maybe hundreds of jobs, right? So don't be discouraged and continue to stay motivated and keep applying, because the more that you apply, the more opportunities that you're going to have, and the greater that your name is out there, right? It's the same with anything, honestly. More exposure, the more likelihood that you're going to actually get that job. And then finally, for each job, especially the ones that you really care about, you should be customizing your resume. And so I'm going to go into kind of exactly what I mean by that. Really quick, like kind of my first thing is kind of, I just wanted to show you what my Google Drive looks like, my personal Google Drive for my like job stuff. I tracked my applications at the time via Gmail tags. Like I would like sort them into folders in Gmail, but you can see I had like a master resume down here, this little one right there. And then I made copies for each places I applied that were like super, I really, really wanted that job. And then once you make a copy of your resume, you can rename it, and, stuff like that. And I also had a cover letter, which we'll go into. So kind of getting an example of customizing it. Here's an example of one of Cloudinary's open roles today. It's for our developer support engineer role. And specifically, we're going to focus on the responsibility section and the about you section, or sometimes they say like skills section or something like that. The responsibility section, obviously you want to pay attention to, because it gives you a sense of what you'll be doing on a day-to-day, but they're also a set of expectations that they basically hope that you can fulfill. And you can guarantee that you'll be interviewed on the responsibilities portion, as well as the about you portion, right? So these are also like important things for you to kind of put your best foot forward. Looking at each line of the responsibilities, you want to make sure that these are somewhere or encompassed somewhere on your resume, and that you reference the skills they're looking for. So for example, taking the responsibilities and looking just at the first 4 lines of the responsibilities. Let's assume that I was applying for this role back in 2018, coming from Clover, right? My generic resume and LinkedIn say this middle part where I own day-to-day operations for developer relations at market, including onboarding, conducting app approval, providing technical and operational support to third-party developers, right? The responsibilities are asking for responding to customer support requests, providing solutions and best practices, handling code-related queries, and writing code samples and debugging issues, right? From there, I would make a copy of my resume, and I can essentially, the first 4 lines of the responsibilities, I could encompass this in one bullet point. I'll just update my first bullet point, right? Own day-to-day operations for developer relations and at market operations team, including, and now I'm going to go through each 4 of those responsibilities, providing technical documentation for customers' questions, educating developers on Clover development best practices, and debugging issues to completion and suggesting solutions. So you'll notice that, first of all, I wanted to point out, I didn't lie and say that I coded in this role, right? One of the things that they wanted was like handle code-related queries, write code samples. Like I didn't code in that role. I'm not going to lie about it. The resume is not about lying. Embellishing is also not about lying. But what I did was I said that I could point to our technical documentation and provide solutions that way. That kind of shows them that I'm code knowledgeable, and so that I like maybe could be in this role. And then finally, I also use the same words, but in slightly different ways, right? So don't copy paste the job description and put it in your resume, but you should, and definitely should, use some of those keywords that are in those like long sentences and responsibilities and insert that into your resume. And the reason for this is because the recruiters, they may or may not be working very closely with the hiring managers. So they may or may not know have a really good sense of what the job actually is. So all they have is the job description to go off of. They're going to like look at the job description and then look at your resume. And they say like, oh, okay, like best practices. Okay, solutions, debugging. Those words match. This person might be qualified. That's legitimately what they're doing. And also what the screen reader things are doing. So use the same words within reason, but don't copy, right? Really quick on the about you section, the same goes for that. Make sure you cover as much as this as possible in your resume without lying. Typically, these can be added to your skill section, typically, if you don't already reference it in some piece of your, job, the rest of the experience in your resume. So for example, education requirements, bachelor's degree in computer science or equivalent. You're going to see that everywhere. Most say or equivalent now. You're all part of TKH. Boot camps are very, very common nowadays. So own it, put it in your education. It's the equivalent for sure. So notice I had a boot camp in my skills section also. I actually attended like a 6-week Python boot camp. I put that in my skills. That's another option if you feel like your education. I know some of you guys might be computer science majors, so you can have education as like your major if you feel like it's like computer science or equivalent, and then have your TKH in your skills. But honestly, you guys have like a really long, I put mine in my skills because it was only 6 weeks, and then it wasn't like a 0 to 100 program. It was just like a get more familiar with Python. So like, I didn't feel like, but you guys should definitely put TKH in your education section. And then notice that, they had asked for hands-on coding experience, and, other stuff kind of reading through. I put, hands-on coding experience. I put my familiarity with specific languages in my skill section. For jobs, if they list specific languages that you'll be working in, you will definitely want to list those in your skill section if you're familiar or proficient in it. And these are words that are like kind of weird, but this is me only. I didn't find this on Google or something, but I will definitely put like familiar with, if I'm like, I could probably Google it and figure it out, but I'm not like going to write a whole app in this language, or do a whole like major project in this language. And like proficient, and it's definitely like I could write an app in this language sort of situation. So those are like the words that I use. And it's my way of adding that to my resume to show that I'm familiar with it without lying and saying that I know that I'm like an expert in this language, right? So that's definitely important to kind of keep in mind as well. Finally, if they give you an option of submitting a cover letter, I would typically try to submit a cover letter, especially for those jobs that you like really, really like. Like obviously you're going to apply to jobs that you're like, I could go either way. And there's jobs where you're like, I want this. If they give you an option of submitting a cover letter, you should. You will follow the same principles as a resume customization. Your cover letter must be specific and reflect what you're looking for in the job description. If you have a generic cover letter, which I wrote like a generic cover letter that I then also customized like my resume. If you just submit the generic cover letter, like they're going to see that it's a generic cover letter. So just make sure that you do edit it in some capacity for the job. So there's a ton of samples out there. Here's a quick formula of mine. The purpose of the cover letter is to breathe some personality into your resume and also bring the recruiter's attention to details that may easily be glossed over if they were reading your resume. So use your own, professional voice. Don't be afraid to add in items that show that you're excited for this role. In my like general cover letter, I started with a summary, which will be very similar to your elevator pitch. And also an introduction. The second paragraph is introduction of like why I'm interested in this position. Again, you're like customizing it for this one. Don't say something generic. I go into a paragraph or two trying to address the job responsibilities and skills. So again, going line by line and drawing from my experience from my resume, matching it to their job and responsibilities and skills that they're looking for. Again, you can use similar language that you already use in your resume, so you don't have to like rewrite everything that you wrote in your resume. You could just like copy paste those sentences. And then finally, I close with a little schmoozing. People like to feel good about themselves, and the recruiter wants to know that you're excited to apply to this position and this company, that you're not just applying to any job, even though you might be. Try your best to convince them that it's this position is your dream job, every single job that you apply to. And just as a side note, this cover letter, I was looking back to it last night or whatever, and I was like, oh, this is so funny. It's a perfect example of a fake it till you make it. I applied to this job. I was super underqualified for this job. I remember it was in an industry that I'd left for years at this point. I had zero experience in, and honestly, I wasn't even really interested in it, but you go for it. Job hunting is a numbers game. I was like, let's just do it. Like, see what happens. So yeah. And finally, save everything as PDFs and double check formatting and file name before submitting. That's like my one administrative, like don't send a Word doc or a Google Doc to a recruiter and don't submit that. It's just this level of professionalism. Make sure you save everything as a PDF. And you want to make sure everything still looks the same. And that's the benefit of a PDF, is it keeps everything formatted. And then also the file name. So if you have like a generic like resume.pdf as your file name, it's going to get lost in this like giant pile. So make sure it's your first name, last name, resume. Even better, first name, last name, resume, company name, just so you can even keep track of it as you save it in your Google Drive as a copy that you submitted to this company. And then, go forth from there. So now finally, you applied to 300 jobs and you landed an interview. So how do you prepare for that? My first tip for interviewing is that interviewing is a skill that you need practice. People think interviewing is like a conversation. It's not. It's like a standardized test. The questions might be slightly different from test to test or year to year, but you can and you should prepare for the types of questions that you might get so that you can set yourself up for the best possible interview and like train yourself for them. It really is like a skill, interviewing on its own. If you haven't already started, you should write down and practice interview questions on a weekly basis, especially when you're actively looking for a job. And these are ideally on your computer since you want to be able to easily find them and access them, pull them up later. So like, again, another plug for like a Google Doc, just put them in there. Some common questions that you should definitely write down and practice way ahead of time are the following. I'm just going to click through them. These are probably not new. Also, like you can find lists on lists on lists on Google. The only one that I want to specifically take note of is the question, do you have questions for me? This is an interview question. That you don't think so. You don't think so because they always end in it. But it is always the very last interview question, and they are analyzing the question that you're asking them. So you should always have at least one or two questions set up specifically for the person that is interviewing you. So you want to try to cater that question to the role that they have, right? The recruiter perhaps can answer questions about company culture, like, hey, can you tell me about company culture? Or like, what's your most favorite part about working here, or whatever, right? But they maybe can't answer questions about what the team culture, like the team that you're going to be joining is like, or the onboarding experience of that team, right? So that's a question maybe that you save for the hiring manager, right? Also, don't ask the same question to every single person because they're putting your answers into these notes that they compare. So like if you're asking the same, like, what's your favorite part about this company to like every single person without sprinkling in another question that's like more catered to them, they're just going to say that you're just repeating the question and you're not actually caring about it. That's the vibe that comes off, right? So again, personalize this interview. It's a conversation. You're getting to know the company as much as they're getting to know you. So you also want to have a good sense of what this company is about before you decide to work there and commit your 40 hours a week to them, right? The reason why my number one tip here is to practice and then practice some more and keep practicing is because the answers you write down will work as templates that you can use and morph to answer pretty much any other question that might be thrown at you, right? So if you know your answers back and forth, they're like muscle memory in your head, you can always kind of take a piece of it and use it for a question that you've never heard before. So this helps because you're going to be nervous in an interview. So the better that you prepare, the better script is in your head. You can kind of let that muscle memory guide you. So for example, there's a question that I asked some people in my mock interviews I did with TKH. Tell me about a recent challenge you faced and how you overcame it, right? This is also one of those generic questions. So you could also like prep for this one. But if you look at my list that I gave above, can you give me an example of a project you worked on recently, right? This, tell me about a recent challenge you faced, it's weird because on the top level, it's not the same question, but you can use the same answer, kind of, right? You can take a piece of give me an example of a project you worked on recently to answer the question, tell me about a recent challenge you and how you overcame it, right? You can talk about what didn't go well in that recent project that you did, how you got over it, and then what you would have done differently, right? Which leads me to my last point. Your answer should tell stories. Interviewers will rarely ask yes or no questions. And so if you answer my question, it's a unfair, but if you answer my question on face value and you don't tell me why or tell me the story, then it's just not going to go well, right? So like the question of give me an example of a project you work on, the answer is not, I worked on an app written in React as part of my TKH fellowship, and you stopped there, right? That is not the answer. I mean, that is an answer. That is very factual. That's very, point A to point B. But what the interview really is looking for is a summary, a goal, the process that you went through, and like lessons learned or like what you're going to do next or something to show that you were actually excited about it, right? So instead of I worked on an app in React as part of my TKH fellowship, an answer could be I worked on a chatbot app along with my partner as part of our TKH fellowship. The goal of the app was to get more familiar with React and external APIs or something. My partner and I were able to successfully use React to create an interactive app that integrated with Google Speech API. Our difficulty was with, the conversationalness of the chatbot, but we were able to train the chatbot to make it more conversational. Next time we plan on doing XYZ, or we plan on improving this bot by adding XYZ moving forward. So like the answer to the question, can you give me an example of a project you worked on? Now isn't just you telling me like, oh yeah, I worked in React. Is now I worked in React. I know how to use Google Speech API. My partner, I know how to work with partners. I know how to work in a group because everything's a team setting nowadays. And then also that I'm constantly looking to improve. It was a project that, had a start and finish, but now I'm kind of like, hey, it was kind of exciting. Let me continue to do it. So I'm excited about development, right? So you're answering now like one single question, you're answering 4 different things about yourself and your personality. And you definitely want to pack as much information into your answers as possible because your interviewer has like a set of questions. They're not going to hit everything. So you want to showcase what you want to showcase to them as often as you can. And that's how you do that, is telling stories. Okay. Moving quickly. After you schedule an interview, here's some quick tips on how to prepare. These are like more practical. The first are kind of familiarizing yourself with everything, right? Oops, sorry. Familiarizing yourself with everything. Give me a second. I lost my notes. The first is, the website job description, making sure that you truly understand what the company itself does, right? So the job description, kind of what your job does, but you want to know what the company does, right? Because again, the recruiter and the interviewer and the hiring manager wants to know that you're excited about working here, not that you're excited about working in general, right? So you should be able to answer the question, what does ABC company do, in about 1 sentence? And interviewers sometimes will ask you that question, like, oh, like, are you familiar with ABC company? And if you say, yeah, kind of familiar, or like, no, not really, then like, why are you here? Why are you in this interview, right? Secondly, you should familiarize yourself, and this is something that people don't actually do very often, but you should familiarize yourself with the interviewer. You should definitely look them up on LinkedIn before, because you're stalking them before your date with them, right? Your interview date. And you can see their background to see kind of where you might have a personal connection with this interviewer. And also it gives you a sense of like their face. So oftentimes these days, right, like you don't want to assume anything about the interviewer, and you don't want any surprises on your interview. You want to limit the amount of surprises that you have. I hope this is a trend that's coming up. So just knowing what that interviewer is going to look like from a face perspective. Sometimes they have even their name pronunciations on their LinkedIn. Think about like how much less stress you have about meeting that person when you know all that information ahead of time, right? And you'll see, how long they've worked there, what their background is. And so you can kind of try to grab, information about, are they technical? Are they not technical? How long have they been at the company? Is there anything personal? Like, oh, hey, I'm applying a remote position, but this person that I'm interviewing with actually is based out of New York or worked in New York for a summer. Maybe that story will come up and you want to connect with them on a personal level. And finally, if you're comfortable, you should reach out to connect on LinkedIn and make sure that you include a note and introduce yourself in the context of why you're connecting, right? So, something I really wanted to, something like, hi, my name is blank. I'm interviewing with you on Monday for the internship with ABC company. Excited for the opportunity and looking forward to meeting you, right? That's an example that feel free to take it. And I wanted to give a shout out to 2 of you that might be here today. And in terms of you guys reached out and connect to me and actually included a note and didn't just do the connection. So again, keep honing that. And you should do that with everyone that you're connecting to on LinkedIn, unless they're like your coworker that you just talked to yesterday. If it's like a cold reach out or kind of someone that might not be familiar with you, you should always introduce yourself in a note. Secondary to that, the person that you connect with won't always respond, because obviously for these 2, I didn't respond to you guys. Sorry about that. They won't always respond. It's not personal. The response is the fact that they connected with you. So also keep that in mind. I know that I personally feel kind of weird about it when people don't respond, but like sometimes you just don't. And especially if you're connecting with someone who is like is like an influencer on LinkedIn, or like a super, you know, a director or a VP or a CEO of something or other. They have 50 million connections / messages a day. So you're going to get lost in there. But the fact that they connected with you is a response on its own. So keep that in mind. And the last two, you know, familiarize yourself with the job description, which is a given. You know, focus on practicing stories that are related to the responsibilities and the requirements and skills that are on there, similar to how you customize your resume. And then finally, obviously re-practice your interview questions. Get them down, get them memory, and do the muscle memory there. And also really quickly, wanted to give some tips on some of the more administrative stuff in interviewing. So in the age of COVID and remote work, we're actually doing a lot more interviews on Zoom, which is actually a blessing in disguise, and I'll tell you why. So be sure to check lighting and your background and make sure that your camera works. Those are the given. Make sure that you dress appropriately. So the rule is that you match or exceed the dress code, ideally exceed by one level, quote unquote, of the company that you're interviewing with based on what you know. So if it's a company that like typically wears like collared shirts, like business casual, you should definitely at least wear a collared shirt, but maybe add a tie, maybe a blazer or something. If you're applying to a startup and they walk around in like sneakers and flip-flops and shorts and t-shirts and stuff all the time, don't show up to the interview in that. You should at least have a collared shirt, right? Do, you know, one level up is kind of the best case scenario, because you want to come off as professional. So make sure you keep that in mind. And the thing with cameras and stuff, like lighting and your camera angle and everything is super important. You feel like it's not, but it's almost part of your first impression, especially in the age of video interviews. I've been interviewing so many people, and it's just a different vibe. Like if I put in the time and effort to kind of make sure that my lighting and stuff and my background and everything is professional, like I would like my interviewer to do the same. It's the same. It's almost the same as your dress at this point. My next, you know, put notes right under your camera. So this one is the blessing. Your practice questions, any notes that you have to kind of help you and kind of make you less nervous and for you to reference, you can actually put them right under the camera if you're using a laptop. So it looks like you're reading, you know, it looks like you're talking and looking at the person still when you're reading your notes. I've been doing this entire time. And I don't know if you've been looking at my video, but I'm like it kind of looks like I'm looking at you, right? And I might look around like once in a while, but it's not like when I'm trying to read, because sometimes you might get so nervous. You're like, oh, I had that interview question written down. I need to find it. If you're looking, I'm going to move my notes now. I don't know if everyone can see, but like look at my video really quick. I'm moving my notes to like the bottom left corner here. You can tell that I'm reading right now, right? Like if I'm looking down at this corner and I'm like reading my notes, you can tell that I'm reading. And the interview is also going to tell that you're reading, and it doesn't come off professional and come off natural when you're trying to have a conversation with the interviewer. So put the notes right under the camera. I make them almost a little sliver so that I'm also not like reading down my whole list, like my whole screen, but I'm only reading like the top quarter of it. It's a way for you to kind of use your notes and take advantage of remote work without, you know, coming off super crazy. My next is kind of obviously read over your notes and answers so they're fresh in your brain. Open the interviewer's LinkedIn again so that you can refamiliarize yourself with their face, with their pronunciation, and just one less surprise for your interview. And then open a copy of the resume that you submitted and read through it really quick so you know exactly what the interviewer is looking at as well. Most of these are, you know, within reason apply for the in-person. In-person, you don't get to have notes. So like, that's why video interviews, blessing in disguise. But in person, you know, plan to arrive 15 minutes early. And you could bring 1 or 2 copies of the resume that you use to submit, like just in case that they don't have it. But typically people have like it on their laptop, a digital copy, but some people try not to bring their laptop to their interviews, and they may not have a copy of your resume. So bring like a copy or 2 just in case so that you can give it to the interviewer if you need to. Oh, obviously a copy for each interview if you happen to have like an all-day interview with like 4 people. So moving on to the offer. Now you've interviewed and one of them would like to offer a job. So we'll talk really quick about navigating the offer, whether you're talking about negotiations or juggling different offers, different interview processes. So first is navigating multiple offers. So like I kind of skipped over the like, I have an offer, what do I do now? You say yes, you say thank you, you say congratulate yourself, and you know, go party or whatever. If you find yourself in the lucky case in which you're navigating multiple offers, and maybe the offer that they, like the first person that like gave you an offer is not your first choice, is like maybe the second or third choice on your list, and you're still interviewing with like your top choices, you want to try to navigate that situation, right? You don't want to lose the offer because like it's a job, but you also like kind of want to wait for the other ones. You can definitely say, thank you for the offer, and I'm excited for the opportunity to join ABC company. Could you let me know when you need my final decision? This gives you an opportunity to kind of see how much time you have. And also be sure to ask any other clarifying questions that you might have, such as their compensation, the start date, other details, how big your team is, et cetera, so that you have all the facts that you need to make a decision on like what job you want to take. Once you know how much time you have, so you got like we need to know by a week or something like that, you should reach out to the other opportunities that you're interviewing with, especially the ones that you're really excited about, to basically give them a heads up, right? I'm wondering if I could get visibility into the estimated time the rest of the interview process will take if the team chooses to move forward with me. I received another offer, but I'm very excited for this opportunity at this XYZ company, and I would love to see it through. So with this message, you're doing two things, right? You're saying like, heads up, I have an offer and I really like to like, I don't want to lose it. I'm still a human. I still need a job, right? But I'm prioritizing you first. So it actually gives kind of an unconscious thing to that recruiter, like, hey, I'm really excited about you guys, not really this other one. Can you tell me, can you move me forward, right? And then it also kind of make sure that you had balanced this with humility, right? You want to say like, oh, how much longer will the interview process take, without like any additional context. You want to make sure that you add the context, like if the team chooses to move forward with me, right? Because you also can't assume that they're actually going to move forward with you. And also the reasoning, which is like, I received another offer, so I'm kind of waiting for it. So context is important, humility and grace is important, but also don't be afraid to like go right out to the company and say something like this. The recruiters deal with this all the time, and they do this all the time. And the answer you get back from the recruiter will be very telling on kind of like where you're standing in that interview process, right? If they're kind of like dismissive, like, oh, we got to interview everyone, maybe another month or two, either they don't respect your time, or you might have been, you might be falling in the middle of the pack of that interview process anyway. So like, maybe don't rely on that opportunity. But if they respond in a very enthusiastic, very caring, very let me see what I can do. Like, are you available for the next 2 or 3 interviews next week? Like very like rushed, and are trying to get you through, then that means that you are maybe a top candidate and that they actually care about you and your time. So those are both very important things. In terms of negotiating compensation, also really quick, there's also a ton of stuff on Google, but for me, my main points are, do your research. Everyone says that, but like, do your research on your role, know the market worth. PayScale as a website and Glassdoor as a website all have kind of this compensation ranges. They are ranges, so it's really hard to tell, and there's obviously a bunch of different factors, but it gives you a nice sense. And personally, I would say pick the top range of the pay scale based on what you know for like your level of experience and your city, your industry, that type of stuff. Pick the top range, pick a specific number, like not like, don't say like, I want 60 to 70K. Like pick a specific number, be like, I want 68K or 68.5K or something like that, right? And ask for that, right? So I'm excited to work here, and I know I'll bring a lot of value. I appreciate the offer at blank that you gave me, but I'm looking for something closer to blank. And you like, it sounds so forward, but do not feel afraid and don't feel nervous to ask for that money that is market value, because they have like these recruiters, these HR people, they have these conversations every day. They're hired to have these conversations. It is their job. And unless you're like way super overqualified for this role, they probably offered you somewhere below middle or like towards the lower scale of the pay scale of their budget even, right? It's still a business. They're trying to pay people less than, what they need to. So don't be afraid. They expect negotiation. If you don't negotiate, then it's almost you're leaving money on the table. Okay. Cool. So moving on to first day. So my first day, how to prep for yourself on your first day and how to set yourself up for success. Definitely from like an administrative perspective, reach out to your recruiter HR ahead of time to make sure that you know what to expect. What's the expected schedule? If you're working remotely, like how you're going to get your computer or get set up on everything, or like what you should do on your first day, just so you're not caught by surprise. And if you're in person, smile and say hi is like my general thing. Like if you're in person, you need, even if you're like naturally an introvert, you kind of have to like, at least your first day, first week, put your best, fake extrovert foot forward if you're an introvert on day one and week one to try to introduce yourself to as many people as possible. And virtual, if you're virtual and you're not in person, it's obviously a bit harder. Ask your manager who are people that are not on your team that it would be smart to get to know and reach out to set up meetings. This does two things. One, it lets you meet people right in your first week or so when you're not really like bogged down with work and you're not like trying to, get all your stuff done. You're kind of pretty much free on your first day, first week. So it gets you to meet people. And number two, it shows your manager you have initiative. So it's already starting to like put your best foot forward with your manager. And then if your company has them, participate in as many, team bonding and company activities as possible, just so like your face is out there, and it gives you a good sense of company culture as well, so you can get to know people there a little bit better. And honestly, like it's hard because it's for you as a new person. Your manager, your HR team, they're going to try their best to like make you like introduce you to people and do this, that, and the other. But like a lot of companies don't have structure to like, how do you get someone to feel included in a company? A lot of companies don't have that like mindset in terms of their structure today. So it is kind of your responsibility, unfortunately, to put yourself out there and to put yourself in those kind of more social situations. And honestly, like as someone who has been at my company for 3 years, like we were really small when we started out, like maybe 70 people. So I kind of knew everyone by name, by face. Now we're at like a bunch. And especially during COVID, there's like a ton of people who have joined that I saw the email like flow through my inbox and I like never see them again. And it's so awkward coming across someone who's been here for 2 or 3 months. And I've like, this is the first time we're saying hi. It's less awkward in COVID just because there's not like an office to like bump into someone. But like definitely when we were in the office, there'd be like someone who had been there for like a month or two. And I'd be like, well, this is awkward. Like, I don't want to offend the new person by saying that like, hey, I like kind of know who you are, but I haven't introduced myself in the last 2 months. So just it is almost the benefit of the doubt to the new person. Like just say hi, introduce yourself to everyone. Like you're new to everyone, whereas everyone else, there might not be sure if you're new, it's your day 1, or it's you're new and it's your day 90. So just introduce yourself to everyone. My next tip is to get to know your manager and team expectations. So in your first one-on-one with your manager, you should ask them what they hope you will achieve in blank days and set concrete expectations at the start in terms of like feedback cycles and timelines for like projects. If they already have you on a project on your first one, it's easy for you, or sometimes you can set yourself like a 30, 60, 90 day plan. But honestly, the manager probably has like something in mind already, or they should have something. If you already know that like you're going to be working on a project, then you can kind of set your own goals as well, so you don't come to that meeting empty-handed. But it's really important to know explicitly what your manager or team lead is going to be expecting from you in a certain period of time. And then you should definitely chat with your team members in the same role if you have them. So what were the things that they wish that they knew when they were starting off? Because that's going to really help you, right? Kind of get a best foot forward, and you get to know your team better. And increase kind of that team dynamic. And the final thing is around staying organized. All jobs require juggling of several different tasks. So my kind of quick admin tip for this is to schedule blocks of time on your calendar to do tasks. So my company uses Google's ecosystem. So we use Google Calendars, and I will literally set like a 30-minute task to do something. If I know something has a deadline, or if I know a project is due like 2 weeks from now, I will set, however much time I think I will need in blocks spread out between now and 2 weeks from now. So I make sure that I work on it. And even if you don't actually get to work on it in that time, you're reminded constantly that that's a project that you have. So it acts as a reminder on your calendar. it's interesting because your calendar just becomes your most important thing. I know like when you guys are in school or in college, like you don't actually follow a calendar very often, but like for some reason, when you start working, your calendar becomes your guidebook. So use it to your advantage. And then when you do have a to-do list, definitely you want to prioritize your to-do list. And then you can also ideally run it by your manager or team leads to make sure that their priorities are also reflected in the prioritization of your to-do list. So say you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're going to have to work on many, many things at a time. And maybe one of them is not going to get finished in time because you're trying to work on other stuff, right? So I have 5 things on my to-do list. I'm going to prioritize them 1 through 5. And my next one-on-one with my team lead or my next whatever, I'll chat with them really quick. I'll be like, hey, so I just want to give you a heads up. I have, I've been pulled into these 5 different projects. I think that in the next 2 weeks, I'll have time for 1, 2, and maybe 3. But 4 and 5, I might not get to, and they're kind of at the bottom. Is that the same as what you're thinking, or should I reprioritize some of these? So that also, again, does many things. 1, shows initiative to your team lead. 2, shows that you're organized and that you're kind of communicating that like something might be a failure. Because if 2 weeks from now and it was due and it failed because you prioritize it at the bottom and you didn't tell your team lead you're prioritizing at the bottom, that's a failure, right? But if you communicate ahead of time, like, hey, this is probably going to not make it, that allows people to plan. And number 3, it allows your manager to also let you know what they think is important so that you can get those things done first. Okay. And finally, my last part is how to set yourself up for continued success and talk about time management and what goals you should set for yourself and how to keep a growth mindset. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, so this is where I'm going to my story mode again. My first job out of college was at Accenture, which is a consulting firm as an analyst. At Accenture, I actually found that they hired technical majors, so anything in STEM, math, science, engineering, whatever, to work on software and development projects in different ways. So that was actually my first exposure to the tech industry. There are so many different ways to get into tech and so many different roles in tech that you'd be surprised that when you have a computer science or STEM or data science background, that will give you a leg up in the industry anyway, even if it's in like, product management or projects management, like things that you didn't think on paper would require a technical background. If you have one, even sales, if you have one, it gives you a leg up. So I also want to encourage you as you all start entering the space that your backgrounds allow you to be very diverse in all of technology and all of software and can take you in many different directions. So keep an open mind, keep your ear to the ground, and like don't disregard a role that might be interesting to you just because you're like, oh, that doesn't fit in my like traditional mindset of what computer science and data science is. So my very first project at Accenture was actually as a project management person in the department. I'm at Cisco, which is a big company, the switch company. So there I was exposed to the software development lifecycle because we work closely with the IT department. In my free time, I went to free websites like codeacademy.com to basically like learn Python and then like figure out how it works because there are so many repetitive tasks that I needed to do as a project management analyst. And that I forget who it was, but someone told me there that like I could script this stuff. And so I was like, oh, like there's a thing called scripting. Let me learn how to do that. And the thing with software is that like software and development is like something that you can learn online and that you can teach yourself. So especially for you all, you want to continue to learn skills. And even if it's something that you're not familiar with, like you look at your job description and someone's like, you should be familiar with some new language that you're not familiar with. You should go to codeacademy.com, go somewhere free, look up that language, see if you can understand the basics of like, print hi world and like how to do a for loop in that language and see now you're familiar with it. You may not be proficient, but you're familiar with it. So you can put that on your resume, right? So at Accenture, I kind of like played a lot with Python. So I took these Python skills with me to Clover, where I continued to automate some of the repetitive tasks that I got introduced to. And I got introduced to Android development concepts and like what an SDK is and like what an API is at Clover. Those terms were completely new to me. Android was completely new to me, but I was going to be working with them every day. So I like searched on Google and tried to learn as much as I could. I worked really closely with the developer support team, who were all new grads in CS or coming from boot camp. So we also like became friends. And I made friends with them, and I sat over their shoulders to watch them do what they did. And I constantly tried to learn new things from them. And any question I took from them, I really wanted to understand how they got to that answer and what the answer meant. So that's what you really want to do. So lesson number 1 is, never ask the same question twice. And also kind of like your job, never ask the same question twice is kind of what I've learned from those first 2 things. So basically, always look to be improving yourself no matter where you go. And not even just in skills in computer science or development or product design or whatever you want to go into, or data science. Those are the skills that you're going to naturally learn from the jobs. You should also learn from those around you the other skills that you may have that may not be related to your job at all. So like these soft skills we're talking about today, sales skills, product design skills, product development skills, like anything that you might be curious about, you should learn about it. And then remember the questions that you get that you like go to someone for an answer for, so that you can answer them yourself for the next time, or be that person that teaches someone else the time after that. So you should be curious. You should let your curiosity guide you to new places, and don't be afraid to ask questions, right? People always say like, people are annoyed by stupid questions, right? People are not annoyed by stupid questions, especially if you're new at a new company. People are annoyed by stupid questions that are asked over and over again, or by somebody who's been there for 2 years and should know that answer, right? So never ask the same question twice. Obviously you can ask it twice, but the guiding principle. This also kind of leads me to lesson 1.5, which is never do the same task twice. So you all are technical, you all know how to do stuff, right? So if you find yourself in repetitive situations, whether that be like a process that can be automated by scripting or coding, or like a manual process, like you find yourself answering an email the same way multiple times, or you find yourself in a meeting that feels like the same thing happens every single week, or that the things don't get done. Day-to-day things, right? You can take a hard look and see if there's an easier and faster way or streamlined way, and either take it upon yourself to figure it out, or bring it up with the person who's responsible for that meeting or something like that. Because it shows initiatives. It shows that you are trying to improve the processes around you. It's tried and that you're always forward looking, right? The people who kind of sit somewhere and kind of do the same thing over and over and over again and don't question it, right? Don't they say that that's like the definition of insanity? So continue to improve and never do the same task twice. Always look about like, how can you save more time? And how can you continue to grow the skills that you have? My like more formal lesson number 2, what I've learned so far is that networking is super, super important. And networking is just a very fancy term to say meet and get to know personally as many people as possible. It's not just about connecting with them on LinkedIn and then never talking to them again, or never engaging with them again. It's about talking to your coworkers, meeting someone at your company, and actually getting to know them as a friend, and actually getting to know them actually so that they know your skills and how you are as a person and as a worker. Because every single person you meet in your jobs is a potential new manager or potential new coworker at your next job, in your future job. And you should just try to get to know them. Me, for example, right? So I went to Accenture, Clover, Cloudinary. I met several people at Accenture that actually tried to reach out to me to hire me for other places after I left Accenture. So after I left Accenture to Clover, I had a ton of people try to like poach me to their jobs after they left Accenture. And like they were all great opportunities. I just was happy at Clover at the time. I actually got my job at Clover from one of my friends from college. Like he was just a friend. We had never worked together, but he was like, oh, I'll refer you or whatever, right? And then at Clover, I met a coworker of mine who was on my team, and she left Clover and came to Cloudinary, and I got my job at Cloudinary because my coworker brought me over there. So I've been a referral ever since Accenture, right? After Accenture. And you will find that you will likely be too, and that your referral network is everybody, right? It's your family, it's your actual friends, it's your coworkers. And so every single person that you have an opportunity to make an actual connection with and show them that you are good at what you do, that is going to be the number one. Like I think that you will take that on to kind of further jobs. You'll always be a referral after that. There's always going to be someone who'd be happy to work with you at any company that you go. That means that you'll have a better in at that company. Cloudinary, for example, I think like some stat was like 60 or 70% of our new hires up until recently were referrals. So is a thing. And my final and biggest lesson that I'll close off on is focusing on your growth mindset and challenge yourself to keep improving, right? They're kind of related to lessons above. And this is a concept that's pretty popular, so you actually may be familiar with it. But at a high level, people can be in a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. And it's also completely normal based on where you are in your life and what's going on to kind of switch between both. So just because you feel like you might be in a fixed mindset right now, doesn't mean that you can't go to growth, and vice versa. So keep that in mind. But my lesson is you always want to be focused on trying to keep yourself in growth. So that's where you're saying yes to challenges, you're trying new things, and you're staying curious about everything around you. This will show the people that you work with that you're like constantly improving, you're learning, you're trying to improve your job on the day-to-day. You're making their lives easier, right, by helping them with whatever they can do. And you will continue to improve even personally and professionally so you can take on the next challenge and level up. So there's a ton of articles out there, but read those questions, try to see where you're at, and then you can find ways to kind of get you into growth if you're not already there. Okay. And honestly, that's what I got. Any questions? I put my email and my LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out if you have any specific questions about any of this, or you want me to look over your resume or whatever you want to talk for 30 minutes. I'm totally down. Feel free to reach out.
Does anyone have questions? Feel free to come off mute and ask, or you can write them in the chat. I'll give it a couple of seconds before I start to ask questions.
Hey, Lillian. So first of all, great conversation. I really enjoyed picking up all those gems, and I'm really looking forward to like reading over the slides and reviewing it before applying to jobs. And so I had a question. So I'm wondering like what sort of content like should I post on LinkedIn? Because so far like I've been only like sharing reflections about projects, but maybe the projects are like every month or so. But I feel like I should have something more that I can talk about. What do you suggest?
Yeah, so that's why like on my LinkedIn and resume one, I was like, I think there are people out there who are way better at both of those things than I am. If you look at my LinkedIn, I personally like all this stuff, because I know I've been working with Jassy about like you guys working on your LinkedIn's. Like I have not done, I've done maybe 80% of the things that they've been encouraging you to do. So I don't personally like post a lot of content or anything like that. So I probably am not the best person to ask, honestly, that question. However, I think what's important about LinkedIn and like the driving factor behind posting content on LinkedIn is, again, to give a better sense of like what your professional personality is like. So I wouldn't post things that are like just because you want to post them, but I think it is important to share your accomplishments. So and a new project that you finished that you're really proud of, like share it, but also talk about your process, right? Tell your story. So talk about your process, share it, the accomplishments, things that you learned, celebrating new jobs, new things. Obviously, that's something that I think people should definitely do. And if you're not a natural sharer, like if you don't share stuff on like Facebook and stuff, you don't like, not everybody can be and not everybody will be an influencer on LinkedIn. But it's all about the guiding principle behind your actions on LinkedIn are around, sharing your story and kind of showing your accomplishments so that you can, so that people who are stalking you before interviews can see that. And the purpose around LinkedIn as well, because I see a lot of people like engage on certain posts like, oh, that's a great thing, like, oh, something like that. The action of doing that is good because you are trying to get to that level of friendship with the person that you're connected with, right? So like I mentioned, you could connect with someone on LinkedIn, but if you don't like actually engage with them, they're just a connection on LinkedIn that they won't turn into a referral or anyone like that. So you have to do that active engagement. And ideally, eventually it'll turn into one-on-one, but you got to work your way up there, especially for people who are kind of more popular, more influency on LinkedIn, if that makes sense.
Can I just add something to that really quickly? So I mean, me myself, like I don't post a lot, but I'll do like a lot of sharing, and I'll just add like a comment. So that alone gets me the exposure that I need. So let's say, for instance, if someone who has like a bunch of followers is they write, there's something on whether it be like IG, LinkedIn, Twitter, and I just just like repost it with like a comment. All of their followers see my comment. So now I'm reaching, rather than the small amount of followers that I have, I'm reaching 10 times as more followers now. So people can see that comment. So it's not that you always have to, post your own things or, kind of create like those thought pieces. But I mean, like my mind, it's times where I'm just like tuned out of like social media, but I'll probably spend like a half hour of just looking at, certain things and adding my the 2 cents rather than like a full, blown, like post or something. So just be active in terms of just like commenting, resharing. That's like one of the easiest way for you to kind of get eyes on your the profiles too.
Yeah. Recruiters definitely use LinkedIn to try to find people in the industry too. So I think that like when you're sharing content that is like relevant to the specific industry that you're trying to break into, like that's for recruiters to find you as well.
Yeah. Any other questions? You can go ahead, Catherine.
All right. Oh, thank you for all the information that you brought, Lillian. It was very insightful. I learned so much throughout this. One of the things that I noticed that you mentioned in the beginning about resume is that if there's any experiences that we might have that might not be relevant to the role, if we pass on having that one-page resume, that we could take it out. And so right now I do have a 2-page resume that I'm submitting to hiring managers. And, I do have a lot of experiences there, but let's say if I take experiences out such as teaching, then I will have this like blank area in my resume where I haven't worked. And so do you still recommend taking out those irrelevant experiences for the jobs if I will have, let's say, this 1-year gap on my resume?
Yeah, I see. So so I guess that's the balance between like making sure there's not a gap in like your working or your education or something, and then like making sure that you have that you're under 1 page. So like I mentioned, I definitely recommend that you only have 1 page because having a 2-page resume in the general industry is not very common. I think there's a couple ways that you can address that gap in your work history. One way is that you can add a line that like says that you worked from here to here as a teacher, but you don't need to like take up the space of the description of the thing that you did, if that makes sense. So it can just be kind of a line that says like, just so that is basically covering that like, hey, I was working at this time and I was working as a teacher, and you can elaborate if you need to. But basically you can take less space with the descriptions, right? So usually we say like, oh, make sure you have like 2 or 3 bullets for each job that you had. For the ones that you don't feel like are relevant to the job that you're applying for, you can have just a single line that just shows that you worked there in that time. On the flip side though, if you remove it, I don't think that the question about like, what were you doing from this year to this year? It used to be very, very important. It's really not as important anymore. If your most recent experiences or your last like year 2 or 3 are on your resume and are like covered or something like that, the stuff before that or even a random gap is not really as important. And if it is important to them for some reason, they will ask you on the interview. Like the recruiter will ask you, right? So that's why like you want to make sure that your resume is so relevant, like all your content on your resume is as relevant as possible to the job description and the job skills, to the point where they're like, well, this person is obviously qualified, but yeah, I'm kind of confused about the couple years gap that they may have had. And they'll just ask you about that in your interview, and then you have an opportunity to explain like, oh, I was a teacher, and you can tell a story about being a teacher and stuff like that. So if it's completely not relevant, I just personally, I wouldn't even include it.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you for that. Because currently I have it where for each job description, I have the same amount of lines and the same amount of bullet points. So just like for those job descriptions that are relevant, to just take less section.
Yeah, exactly. Or you can like even remove the description altogether. Like you can just have the job and the title and the years you covered it. And that covers like I did work during this time, but the role itself, like I don't find is super relevant for what I'm applying for. So I'm just letting you know that I was working.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Hi, how are you? My name is Stephanie. I'm a web development fellow, and I also am a teacher right now. So I've been applying to more of the technical roles, but I've also been looking into customer success.
Mhm.
How would you say would be the best way to be able to word that, I haven't exactly, worked in customer success, like handling multiple client accounts and things like that, but that I could potentially be good for it, because, I've worked, like my job, it involves a lot of, dealing with people and so on. And then I also have that technical side. So, because like for example in Cloudinary, customer success does have like a technical aspect to it, but I'm seeing that a lot of other customer success roles do not.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so I'm just wondering, how should I go about the fact that I might not have experience using like a lot of those management systems that are used in customer success, but that I do have the ability to learn it if I get hired. So like, how can I navigate that space?
Yeah, exactly. So that's a great question. So that's what I was saying before, that like customer success is like this general new field, and then it is currently split, like the majority is non-technical, and then like a small piece is technical. I think that customer success roles at software technology companies are a great way also to get into the industry as well, because you'll meet people and then you're networking, and then you get to move on to the kind of the next thing. So even if you feel weird, or I don't know if you'd feel weird or not, about like potentially not using your technical skills to go into customer success role, as long as you're trying to get into the industry that you're going for, I definitely say go for it. As far as addressing your question around, right now I'm a teacher. I haven't had experience in customer success, but how can I like navigate or word that? That is why that is why I really encourage people, you should look at the job description and mirror that job description in any experience that you do have, right? The fact that you're a teacher does not mean that you don't have any customer success skills. Like that's a way of thinking that like it's just because of your title. Every single job that every person has, there's some piece of that job that can be reflected in the job that you're trying to get, right? Customer success at a high level is all about, improving relationships with your customers, right? And like making sure that they're happy, keeping organized, doing whatever, teaching. I teach best practices. You're a teacher, right? So it's one of those things where look at the job description and the responsibilities and see. So let me just go back to if I look at which one did I have? So this is for the developer support role, but I would say that it's like, half of it is similar other than best practices and stuff like that, right? So like you can look at it and say like you're providing solutions and best practices, integrate Cloudinary for customers, responding to customers' technical support questions. Customer success roles probably also have like improving relationships or having strategic conversations. Your experience in teaching and kind of like organizing and communicating with a large group of people. And not only is it the students, but probably also parents once in a while. You can take some of the words that they're doing and kind of just make sure that you can like kind of morph it to apply it to teaching. So you can find a lot of parallels in your current role in to kind of connect it. So you can, and I don't want you to, I think you should try to like look for the thin thread if you feel like it. So I would look at, responding to customers' questions and feature related requests. Like it's one of those things where is there any point in your job in which you're answering people's questions, or you're coordinating a lot of different folk, like a lot of different teams or a lot of different groups or parents or things like that, or you're managing the relationship with parents or something like that. So I think that there's a lot of parallels that you can do without necessarily lying or like embellishing too much, but also not saying that you don't have any customer success experience. So I think a lot of that isn't, sorry, so I do talk a lot, I tend to ramble. So I think a part of it's also like taking the core of like what a customer success manager is, making sure that you truly understand that, and then looking at the responsibilities of what they're looking for and drawing those parallels to your current job description that you may have on your resume to the responsibilities that they're looking for, and just kind of like mix those words together like I did in this section, right? I took what I had and then I kind of like mixed it in without necessarily lying about what my current role was. In your specific case as well, if you feel like your education, so that's kind of about like customizing your resume to the role that you're applying for. If you feel like like TKH, as you're applying to more technical jobs, if you feel like your TKH experience is more relevant to the job that you're applying for than your teaching experience, then it doesn't, you could move your education to the top and then have your experience be the second thing that someone looks at. So that's all about customizing your resume as well. Whereas if you feel like your teaching experience is more relevant to the role that you're applying for than TKH at the time, because maybe TKH is technical, but the job you're applying for is not technical, then you could move that to the top and shift that around for the roles that you're applying for. So that's why I always talk about customizing your resume is important. And I know that all of that was a really long-winded way of not being very specific. If you need additional help, feel free to kind of like reach out and like send me your resume, because I think for me it's easier to kind of read the actual words, and then I can show you how you can kind of morph it and kind of pull the pieces of customer success out of there. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. I'm already starting to kind of turn my gears. Because I teach college level.
Well, see, that's perfect, right? So you're not working with kids, you're working with
so I guess every single student is a client, right? Because they're a paying customer.
Exactly, right.
Yeah,
so it's about, you're balancing a lot of different opinions, you are coordinating a lot of different like groups and stuff, you're managing relationships. That's honestly what all customer success is.
I'll probably rework my resume, and I'll be reaching out, because I feel like there's so many more questions that I'm probably gonna come up with as I start reworking everything.
Mhm.
But yeah, thank you so much for your feedback.
Yeah,
I'm gonna definitely work on it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Just a follow-up question to that for you, Lillian. How should students, I guess, put like their projects on like their resumes? Like I'm not sure if you see projects with with your the day-to-day, but if you're looking to hire somebody who's coming, who's brand new to tech, what would you want to see like for their projects, or what kind of I guess like input could they put on their resume about their projects?
Yeah, so I would almost think of projects like so when I was fresh out of college, I put coursework and projects under my education section, like under like UC Berkeley. So I think that if you were to ask someone, that'd be like the most common place to put projects, would be like under TKH, you would talk about a project and like its description, very similar to how you would write about like this, right? Honestly though, if you feel like, again, as you're catering your resume, or if it's based on the job and it really is like a technical job, like you're trying to break into software development, your past experience doesn't necessarily have any software development, it's really just TKH. Why don't you, or why wouldn't you put that as part of, as just another line item in experience, right? You just want to make sure that no one's going to overlook the relevant experience that you do have. So if one of your projects is directly related and relevant to the responsibilities or the skills that are on the resume, then don't be afraid to just break that out into its own separate section and line items, so that you can describe the story behind that project. And the languages you used, and like the concepts that you used, and stuff like that, to show that you know this stuff, that you're not just going to this fellowship but you don't actually know it, or that you can show that. With that being said, I don't know like how many projects you have or something like that, but if you have more than like 2 or 3, you might find yourself like running out of space in your resume. So that's where a link to like a website or a GitHub or something might be relevant there. And I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yeah.
But But I definitely, I mean, break it out. I mean, I think resumes are one of those things where like everyone thinks that there's a lot of hard and fast rules, but I think from outside of the basics of like just the look and feel of the resume, there's not really a lot of hard and fast rules. Like a recruiter's not gonna like look at your resume and think it's weird that you broke out a project to provide more detail at like under education, like there's no rule about that. So
Makes sense. We're at 125. I want to see if there's any last questions before we close out. Questions, comments?
I had one quick last question. First, thank you so much. Like, I feel like this talk was extremely insightful. You provided a lot of actionable insights that just are so like simple, but it was like, thank you for bringing the thoughtfulness out of it. I guess my question is kind of like more in the future, but I was going to say something about what is a process, I guess, like when you're at a job, but you're trying to kind of like move. So I know that you like your job history, you say you got it from referrals, but we talk about like getting the job, but sometimes like on the other end, like closing the job out. So if you know that you're looking for a new position, you probably should like, I guess, like finish all of your projects and that kind of stuff. But also, what does that look like in terms of, transitioning relationships, like working relationships and things of that nature? I don't know if that question makes sense, but hopefully.
Yeah. So are you looking at transitioning like within the same company, like you're trying to move up or move lateral, or are you thinking about like, I'm done with this job, I'd like to move to my next one?
Either one, if you could touch on either one.
Yeah. So the more internal moves, I think those are done by the networking part. So it's like getting to know a bunch of different people and like showing them that you're a good worker. It's much easier to then, when something opens up, to be like, hey, I'd like to put my hand up for that, and transitioning that way. If you're at a healthy company, in either case, no one is going to be mad at you for moving up, moving laterally, moving to a new company. If you're at a healthy company and have a healthy team leader, coworkers, and managers. I want to preface that. If anyone has had a bad experience moving from one company to another because someone like hated them or they burned bridges or something, that is because it was an unhealthy company. Because at the end of the day, we're all trying to move up in our careers and like make more money and stuff like that, right? Like the fact that you're moving on should not be offensive to someone who's on your team. So I want everyone to remember that. And no one is going to be like offended that you are doing so. So anyway, internal moves are all about that networking really internally, because that new team that opened up the thing, hopefully you're pretty good friends with that manager, where that manager knows what you are like to work with. And so they would obviously be like, yeah, it'd be great if so-and-so came over to my team. Moving up, that's why I gave so many tips on like making sure that you and your team lead and you and your manager are like in sync all the time. Because you want to know like what their expectations are, what they find important, and the types of things that they are looking for and that they find important really reflect on like what they're going to think about when they think about, oh, who am I going to promote to like this new role, right? So I mean, it's all about kind of managing relationships at that point internally. Externally, it's different, right? Because you want to balance like I don't want to tell my current job that I'm looking what I am. So you'll have to update your LinkedIn. Know that your recruiting team may know that you're on your way out. They're not going to do anything about it though. Don't worry about it. So you are looking, you're on your way out. You're going to start applying to other places, reach out to your network. So again, if you did a good job networking, you probably have people who are in other places now. So reach out to your network. You can post one of those like, hey, I'm looking for a new job thing on LinkedIn, although your current job and your current manager might see that. So maybe not. And then, try to find opportunities that way, go through all the steps and put your best foot forward. If you got a new job and you're about to transition, something that a lot of people come up with, and I know, sorry, we're almost at time, but your current job might try to keep you. They might be like, oh, like, let me match that new pay scale, or let me like something like that. If you had asked for those raises before and only now they're willing to give you that raise, I would walk away. This company didn't care about keeping you that much that they would have given you a raise before. And only now when they're about to leave you, do they realize that you're so important. So I would continue. I think once I accept it, like my philosophy personally, other people are different. But once I've accepted another offer for a certain dollar amount that I've negotiated, I'm committed to that company now. With that being said, it doesn't mean that you need to burn the bridges that you made at your current company. So it's all about just making sure, like I mentioned, no one should be offended. If they're offended, it's probably not a relationship that you want to keep anyway, because it's not a healthy relationship. Everyone should be really happy for you, really excited for you. You should give the standard 2-week notice. If they try to, you shouldn't do less than 2 weeks. So give the standard 2-week notice. If they try to keep you for longer, it depends. Like if you feel like there truly is a reason why you should stay longer than 2 weeks, then, that's really up to you. If it's just because if they ask you to stay for like an extra month, like, no, don't do it. 2 weeks. And make sure, like, truly do work till your very last day. There are a lot of people who, once they get their 2-week notice, they like decide that they're done and they don't do anything for the next 2 weeks. Like you can see their shoulders like relax, and like they literally don't care about helping people transition during this time. The best way to not burn bridges is to work as if this was your full-time job, work as if you had been working the last 2 years, all the way through to your very last day at that company. That includes transitioning, and also take an active role in that, right? Don't rely on your team lead to be like, hey, like, okay, this is our transition plan. Like you should contribute to creating that transition plan, whatever you need to transition, whether it be customers, whether it be internal projects, whether it be something or other. And you had a question about like, oh, should I like finish internal projects? Like I mentioned, if you can in that last 2 weeks, like you should continue to work as fast and as hard as you did prior in those last 2 weeks. But if that project is not going to be done, it's going to take another 2 weeks, another 3 weeks, another month, another 2 months. You don't have to stay. It's transitioning at that point. And make that transition plan and be proactive in that transition plan. And don't make your team lead or your manager kind of like clean up your mess, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Thank you so much for that. That was great.
Yeah.
All right, we are at 1:30, a little bit over, but that's fine. I think, the answers that we got were, something that we all needed to hear. I definitely learned some new things. So hopefully you all kind of felt the same way. I feel like you all did based on your feedback. So let's all give a virtual round of applause for Lily. Thank you so much, Lily. We really appreciate you. Any I guess like final comments you have, or I know you shared your email and your LinkedIn, so you should be expecting a bunch of emails in pretty soon.
Yeah, no problem. Good luck to everyone. I know it's hard breaking into a new industry. Everyone's been there at one point, so good luck. Hopefully it helped.